She always believed that contract romances only existed in the cheap novels her best friend loved to read, until her own boss, a ruthless and arrogant billionaire, summoned her with an unexpected proposal to become his fiancée of convenience. What began as a cold, calculated deal quickly turned into a whirlwind of emotions, family secrets, and stolen kisses. But can a contract truly contain a heart that insists on loving for real? Claire Morgan had always prided herself on her ability to read people. In her 26 years, she had encountered enough arrogant men to recognize the type from a mile away. But Julian Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Construction, one of London's most powerful companies, was in a league of his own. Sitting across from him in his glass-walled office, she watched as he adjusted his perfectly tailored charcoal suit and fixed her with those penetrating grey eyes that seemed to see straight through her professional facade. The morning London fog pressed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting everything in a muted, dreamlike quality. Claire shifted in her chair, her fingers unconsciously smoothing the fabric of her simple black skirt. After 3 months as his personal assistant, she thought she had grown accustomed to his commanding presence. She was wrong. "I need a fiancé," Julian declared suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Claire blinked, certain she had misheard. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" Julian leaned back in his executive chair, his expression as serious as if he were discussing quarterly earnings. "You heard me correctly. I need a wife, specifically. My father's will contains a clause that requires me to be married to maintain full control of Blackwood Construction. Without it, I'll be forced to share power with my cousin Ethan." His jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "That's not acceptable." The absurdity of the situation hit Claire like a physical blow. Here was Julian Blackwood, billionaire, business magnate, and London's most eligible bachelor, according to every society magazine, sitting in his ivory tower asking his assistant to marry him. It sounded like something straight out of one of Lucy's ridiculous romance novels. "And you looked around your vast social circle and thought, 'Ah yes, Claire is the perfect candidate for this insane proposition'?" She crossed her arms, fighting to keep her voice steady despite the way her heart had begun racing. If this story is touching your heart, show your support. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends. Every action helps us keep bringing you new stories full of emotion. Julian's expression didn't waver. If anything, he seemed amused by her sarcasm. "You're practical, intelligent, and you need money. I need a wife. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement." Claire's blood ran cold. "How do you know I need money?" "I know about your debts, Claire. The credit cards, the loans you took to help your sick mother last year, the eviction notice that arrived at your flat this morning." His voice was matter-of-fact, but there was something else there, something that almost sounded like concern. The weight of reality crashed down on her. The notice had indeed arrived that morning, giving her and Lucy exactly 30 days to come up with 3 months' back rent or face eviction. She had been so careful to keep her financial troubles private, working extra hours, taking on freelance projects, anything to keep her head above water. The knowledge that Julian had somehow discovered her most guarded secrets made her feel exposed and vulnerable. She studied his face, searching for any sign of manipulation or cruelty, but found only that same unreadable intensity that had both intimidated and intrigued her from the beginning. Julian Blackwood was many things: demanding, controlling, impossible to please. But he wasn't cruel. "What exactly are you proposing?" she heard herself ask. A ghost of a smile played at the corners of his mouth. "A business arrangement. I'll pay off all your debts, ensure you and Lucy can keep your flat, and provide you with a generous salary. In return, you'll play the role of my devoted fiancée and eventually my wife. The marriage will last long enough to satisfy the terms of the will, say 2 years, and then we'll arrange a quiet divorce." Claire's mind raced. It was insane, completely, utterly insane. And yet, "I have conditions." Julian raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised but not displeased by her response. "I'm listening." "First," she began, forcing her voice to remain steady, "I continue working. I won't sit around playing the pampered wife. I need purpose." Julian nodded, seeming almost impressed. "Second, this arrangement remains purely professional. No intimacy." Her cheeks burned as she said it, but she pushed on. "And third, I want premium coffee delivered to the office every morning. The good stuff from Monmouth Coffee Company. For a moment, Julian said nothing. Then, to her complete shock, he threw back his head and laughed. A rich, genuine sound she had never heard from him before. Premium coffee? That's your third demand? Don't underestimate the importance of good coffee, Mr. Blackwood. Julian, he corrected, standing and extending his hand across the desk. If we're going to be married, you should probably call me Julian. Claire stared at his outstretched hand. Strong, elegant, with calluses that spoke of hands-on work despite his executive status. This was it. The moment that would change everything. She thought of the eviction notice, of Lucy's worried face that morning, of the crushing weight of debt that kept her awake at night. She reached out and grasped his hand. His skin was warm, his grip firm and sure. Deal. As their hands remained joined for a moment longer than necessary, Claire felt a strange flutter in her chest. Julian's eyes seemed to darken, and she realized with a start that he was looking at her differently, not as his efficient assistant, but as a woman. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. "Welcome to the family, Claire Morgan," he said softly, his thumb brushing almost imperceptibly across her knuckles before he released her hand. As Claire left his office on unsteady legs, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just made either the best or worst decision of her life. Behind his desk, Julian watched her go, a complex expression playing across his features. Neither of them could have predicted that their carefully constructed business arrangement was about to become something far more complicated and infinitely more dangerous to their hearts. The next morning arrived with the kind of grey London drizzle that seemed to seep into one's bones. Claire stood before her modest wardrobe, staring at clothes that suddenly felt inadequate for her new role. How did one dress to play the fiancé of a billionaire? She settled on her best navy blazer and matching skirt, professional yet feminine, and tried to ignore the way her hands trembled as she applied her makeup. Lucy had been suspicious from the moment Claire walked through their flat door the previous evening, but one look at Claire's shell-shocked expression had prompted her to brew tea instead of asking questions. Now, as Claire attempted to eat breakfast, Lucy's curiosity could no longer be contained. "You're different," Lucy observed, her green eyes studying Claire over her coffee mug. "Something happened yesterday. And don't you dare tell me it's nothing. I've known you for 5 years, Claire Morgan." Before Claire could formulate a response that wouldn't sound completely insane, her phone buzzed. Julian's name appeared on the screen, and despite everything, her pulse quickened. "Good morning, car will collect you at 8:30. We need to discuss today's announcement before the press arrives." "Jay, who's texting you at 7 in the morning?" Lucy peered over Claire's shoulder, her eyes widening as she read the message. "Car, press, Claire Elizabeth Morgan. What exactly—" "I'm engaged," Claire blurted out, the words tumbling from her lips before she could stop them. Lucy's coffee mug clattered against the table. "You're what? To who? When? How is this the first I'm hearing about—" Her face went pale. "Please tell me it's not to that horrible man from the accounting department who keeps asking you out." "It's Julian," Claire said quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. Lucy's mouth opened and closed several times before she managed to speak. "Julian, as in Julian Blackwood, your boss, the man you've called impossible and infuriatingly arrogant, approximately 300 times in the past 3 months. Claire nodded miserably. "It's complicated." Exactly 30 minutes later, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up outside their building. Through the rain-streaked window, Claire could see a uniformed driver stepping out to open the rear door. Her stomach churned with a mixture of excitement and terror. The interior of the car was all buttery leather and subtle luxury. Julian sat in the far corner, immaculate as always, in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Claire's monthly salary. He looked up from his phone as she settled beside him, and something flickered in those grey eyes. Approval. Appreciation. "You look perfect," he said simply, and Claire felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Thank you, I think." She fidgeted with her handbag. "So what exactly happens now?" "Now we convince the world that we're madly in love." Julian's voice was businesslike, but Claire caught something else underneath. Nervousness, perhaps? "The press conference is at 10. My publicist has prepared statements, but the key is to appear natural, relaxed." Claire nearly laughed. "Right, natural. while lying to an entire room of journalists about being engaged to you. Julian turned to face her fully, and Claire was struck by how close they were sitting. Close enough to see the flecks of blue in his grey eyes, close enough to catch the subtle scent of his cologne, something expensive and distinctly masculine. "Claire," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it, "this will only work if we trust each other. Can you do that?" Before she could answer, they had arrived at Blackwood Construction's headquarters. The building's glass facade gleamed even in the grey morning light, and Claire could see reporters and cameras already gathering in the lobby. The press conference room was packed to capacity. Claire found herself seated beside Julian at a polished mahogany table, facing what felt like a sea of expectant faces and flashing cameras. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them together in her lap. Julian's warm fingers suddenly covered hers, and she looked up to find him studying her face with genuine concern. "Breathe," he murmured, so quietly only she could hear. "I've got you." The first question came almost immediately. "Mr. Blackwood, this engagement comes as quite a surprise. Can you tell us how you and Ms. Morgan met?" Julian's expression transformed into something Claire had never seen before, tender, almost loving. His thumb traced gentle circles over her knuckles as he spoke. "Claire has been by my side professionally for months now, and over time I realized she had become indispensable to me in ways that went far beyond work." His voice was warm, convincing. "She challenges me, grounds me, makes me want to be a better man. I suppose I fell in love with her brilliant mind first, and then the rest of her followed." Claire's breath caught in her throat. The way he was looking at her, the genuine warmth in his voice. For a moment she almost believed it herself. "And what about you, Ms. Morgan?" another reporter called out. "When did you realize your feelings for Mr. Blackwood had changed?" Claire's mind went blank. Panic fluttered in her chest until she felt Julian's hand squeeze hers encouragingly. She drew strength from that simple touch and found her voice. "Julian has this way of surprising you," she said, the words coming more easily than she'd expected. "Behind all that intensity and drive, there's a man who notices when you're having a bad day, who remembers how you like your coffee, who—" She trailed off, suddenly aware that she wasn't entirely acting anymore. "Who makes you feel like anything is possible?" The questions continued for another 20 minutes, but Claire barely heard them. She was too focused on the way Julian's hand never left hers, the way he looked at her as if she truly was the most important person in his world. By the time they left the podium, she felt dizzy with confusion. "That was—" Julian began as they escaped to his private office. "Surreal," Claire finished. "I can't believe we just did that." "You were perfect," Julian said, his voice returning to its usual businesslike tone. Convincing, natural. Something in his quick shift back to professionalism stung more than it should have. "Right, good. Just playing our parts." Julian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Yes, our parts." As Claire prepared to return to her desk and attempt to navigate the rest of what was sure to be a very strange day, Julian's voice stopped her at the door. "Claire?" When she turned back, he was standing behind his desk, hands shoved deep in his pockets, looking suddenly uncertain. "Thank you for agreeing to this. I know it can't be easy." For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the expanse of his office. Something hung in the air between them, something new and fragile and entirely unscripted. Then Julian's phone rang, shattering the moment, and Claire fled to the relative safety of her own desk, her heart pounding with the terrifying realization that somewhere between agreeing to his proposition and holding his hand in front of those cameras, the line between performance and reality had begun to blur. The penthouse elevator climbed silently toward the 32nd floor, carrying Claire and her 2 modest suitcases toward a life she never could have imagined. 3 days had passed since the press conference, 3 days of constant media attention, congratulatory emails from colleagues, and the surreal experience of pretending her engagement was real. Now came the next phase of their arrangement, moving in together. Julian had insisted it was necessary for appearances. "Engaged couples live together, Claire. The press will be watching." His logic was sound, even if the thought of sharing space with him made her stomach flutter with nervousness. The elevator doors opened to reveal Julian waiting in the foyer, and Claire's breath caught. Gone was his usual business attire. Instead, He wore dark jeans and a soft grey sweater that hugged his broad shoulders in ways that made her mouth go dry. This casual version of Julian Blackwood was somehow more dangerous than the controlled CEO she knew. "Welcome home," he said, reaching for her suitcases with an easy grace that spoke of genuine manners rather than mere politeness. The penthouse was exactly what she'd expected. All clean lines, expensive furniture, and breathtaking views of London's skyline. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the Thames winding through the city like a silver ribbon, and Claire found herself momentarily speechless. "It's beautiful," she managed, setting down her handbag on a glass console table that probably cost more than her yearly salary. "I've prepared the guest suite for you," Julian said, leading her down a hallway lined with modern art. "It has its own bathroom and sitting area, so you'll have complete privacy." He pushed open double doors to reveal a room that was larger than her and Lucy's entire flat. A king-sized bed dominated the space, dressed in crisp white linens, while French doors opened onto a private balcony. It was elegant, sophisticated, and utterly impersonal. "Thank you," Claire said, though something about the formal arrangement stung. What had she expected? That he'd suggest they share a bedroom? The thought made heat rise in her cheeks. "I thought we might have dinner together," Julian said, his hands shoved deep in his pockets in a gesture that was becoming familiar, "to discuss logistics, how we'll handle living together." An hour later, Claire found herself in Julian's kitchen, watching in fascination as he attempted to prepare what he optimistically called pasta carbonara. The reality was somewhat different. "Julian," she said carefully, watching him struggle with the seemingly simple task of boiling water, "have you ever actually cooked before?" "How hard can it be?" he muttered, frowning at the stove as if it were a particularly challenging business merger. The instructions seemed straightforward. Claire bit back a smile as she watched him dump what appeared to be the entire box of spaghetti into a pot that was clearly too small. Water sloshed over the edges, hissing as it hit the burner. "Perhaps I could," she began, but Julian held up a hand. "I've got this under control," he said with the same confidence he usually reserved for board meetings. 20 minutes later, they sat at his dining table staring at plates of what could generously be called pasta. Though the noodles were simultaneously overcooked and somehow still crunchy, swimming in a sauce that resembled scrambled eggs more than anything Italian. "This is," Claire began diplomatically. "Terrible," Julian finished, a rueful smile playing at his lips. "Absolutely terrible." And then, to Claire's complete shock, Julian Blackwood, CEO, millionaire, master of the universe, began to laugh. Not the polite chuckle she'd heard in business meetings, but a real, honest laugh that transformed his entire face. The sound was infectious, and soon Claire was laughing too until tears streamed down her cheeks. "I can't believe you tried to cook for me," she gasped between giggles. "I wanted to—" Julian paused, his laughter fading into something more serious. "I wanted you to feel welcome. This arrangement is strange enough without you feeling like a guest in your own home." Something warm unfurled in Claire's chest at his words. "That's actually very sweet." Their eyes met across the table, and for a moment the air between them seemed to shimmer with possibility. Then Julian's phone buzzed, breaking the spell, and he glanced at it with a frown. "Work?" Claire asked, though she already knew the answer. "Always." Julian's voice held a note of apology. "I'm sorry, I need to take this. It's Tokyo." As Julian disappeared into his study, Claire cleared the dishes, smiling despite herself. She had expected living with Julian to be awkward, uncomfortable, a constant reminder of the artificial nature of their arrangement. Instead, she found herself charmed by his domestic incompetence and touched by his genuine desire to make her comfortable. Later that evening, Claire explored her new surroundings while Julian worked. The penthouse was beautiful but sterile, like a high-end hotel rather than a home. There were no family photos, no personal touches that might reveal something about the man behind the business facade. The only exception was his study, which she glimpsed through the partially open door. Here finally were signs of the real Julian. Bookshelves lined with everything from classic literature to architectural texts, a worn leather chair that looked actually comfortable, and on his desk, a single framed photograph of an older couple who must be his parents. She was about to retreat when Julian's voice stopped her. "You can come in, you know," he said without looking up from his laptop. "It's your home too now." Claire hesitated, then stepped into the room. It smelled like him, that subtle cologne mixed with leather and something indefinably masculine. "I was just exploring," she said, feeling suddenly shy. "I hope that's all right." "Of course." Julian finally looked up, his grey eyes unreadable in the lamplight. "What do you think?" "It's beautiful, but it doesn't feel like you." Julian's fingers paused over his keyboard. "What do you mean?" Claire gestured toward the main living areas. "It's all so perfect. Pristine. Like a magazine spread. But this room—" She trailed off, suddenly afraid she was overstepping. "This room," Julian prompted, his voice strangely gentle. "This room feels real. Like someone actually lives here." For a long moment, Julian said nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost vulnerable. "My father designed the rest of the penthouse, said it needed to reflect the Blackwood image. Powerful, successful, untouchable. And this room? This room is mine." His eyes met hers and Claire felt that strange flutter in her chest again. Perhaps you could help me make the rest of it feel more like home." The suggestion hung between them, loaded with implications neither of them was quite ready to examine. Claire nodded slowly, suddenly very aware of how alone they were, how intimate this conversation had become. "I'd like that," she said softly. As she prepared for bed later that night, Claire couldn't shake the memory of Julian's laugh, the way his entire face had transformed, making him look younger and infinitely more approachable. She was beginning to realize that Julian Blackwood was far more complex than she'd given him credit for. Behind the controlled exterior was a man who tried to cook terrible pasta to make her feel welcome, who wanted his home to feel real rather than perfect. And that realization was far more dangerous than any business arrangement had a right to be. Claire woke to the sound of rain pelting against the floor-to-ceiling windows and the aroma of something that actually smelled edible wafting from the kitchen. After Julian's culinary disaster the night before, she was curious to discover the source of what appeared to be successful cooking. She padded barefoot across the cold hardwood floors, still wearing her pajamas. A simple cotton set in pale pink that she suddenly realized was far too casual for sharing space with Julian Blackwood. But it was too late to retreat now. He had already spotted her hovering in the kitchen doorway. "Good morning," Julian said, glancing up from where he stood at the counter, fully dressed in another impeccably tailored suit despite the early hour. His hair was still slightly damp from his shower, and Claire had to resist the urge to imagine him in his morning routine. "Please tell me you didn't attempt to cook again," she said, eyeing the plates of what appeared to be perfectly prepared eggs Benedict. Julian's mouth quirked into that almost smile she was beginning to recognize. "I may be many things, Claire, but I'm not stupid. I had breakfast catered from the Langham." "Ah," Claire felt oddly disappointed. "That makes more sense. However," Julian continued, moving to the espresso machine, "I did manage to figure out how to work this." He handed her a perfect cappuccino, the foam artfully swirled on top. "Your morning coffee, as promised in our agreement." Their fingers brushed as she accepted the cup, and Claire was startled by the jolt of awareness that shot through her at the simple contact. Julian's eyes darkened slightly, suggesting he felt it too, but neither of them acknowledged what had passed between them. "Thank you," Claire said softly, inhaling the rich aroma. "This smells incredible." "Only the best for my fiancé," Julian replied, but there was something in his tone, a warmth that hadn't been there before, that made the words feel less like performance and more like genuine care. They ate breakfast in companionable silence, the London skyline spread out before them like a grey watercolour painting. Claire found herself stealing glances at Julian, noting the way morning light caught the sharp angles of his face, the careful precision with which he cut his food. Everything about him was controlled, measured, as if he were afraid that letting his guard down might reveal something he wasn't ready to share. "I have a dinner tonight," Julian said suddenly, setting down his coffee cup. "Business associates from Germany. You'll need to attend." Claire's stomach clenched. "As your fiancé?" "Yes." Julian's voice was matter-of-fact, but she caught the slight tension in his shoulders. "It's important that we present a united front. These contracts represent millions of pounds for the company." "Of course." Claire tried to keep the nervousness from her voice. "What should I wear? I'm not sure my wardrobe is quite up to the standards of international business dinners." Julian was quiet for a moment, studying her face with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. "Would you allow me to take care of that?" "Julian, I can't let you buy me clothes. That wasn't part of our agreement." "Consider it a business expense," he said firmly. "If you're going to represent Blackwood Construction, you need to look the part." His expression softened slightly. "Besides, I want you to feel confident tonight. These men can be challenging." Something in his tone made Claire look at him more closely. There was a protectiveness in his voice that hadn't been there before, as if the thought of anyone making her uncomfortable genuinely bothered him. "All right," she conceded, "but nothing too extravagant." Julian's smile was swift and devastating. "I make no promises." 2 hours later, Claire found herself in Harvey Nichols' private shopping suite, surrounded by more designer clothing than she'd ever seen in one place. Julian sat in a leather chair nearby, occasionally offering opinions with the serious consideration he usually reserved for merger negotiations. "The blue brings out your eyes," he said, as she emerged from the dressing room in a midnight blue cocktail dress that fit her like it had been made specifically for her body. Claire turned to study herself in the three-way mirror, hardly recognizing the elegant woman staring back at her. The dress was simple but sophisticated, with clean lines that emphasized her figure without being ostentatious. "It's beautiful," she said softly, running her hands over the silk fabric. "But Julian, this must cost a fortune." "It's perfect," Julian replied, rising from his chair. He moved to stand behind her, their eyes meeting in the mirror. "You're beautiful." The words were spoken so quietly that Claire almost wondered if she'd imagined them. But the way Julian was looking at her, with an intensity that made her breath catch, suggested they'd been entirely real. "Julian," she began, but whatever she might have said was interrupted by the sales associate's return. "Shall we look at shoes to match, Mr. Blackwood?" The moment shattered. Julian stepped back, his professional mask sliding back into place. "Yes, something elegant but comfortable. Miss Morgan will be on her feet for several hours tonight." Even his consideration for her comfort sent warmth spreading through Claire's chest. This was supposed to be a business arrangement, nothing more. So why did every thoughtful gesture, every lingering look, every careful attention to her needs, make her feel like she was slowly drowning in something far more dangerous than mere attraction? That evening, as Claire prepared for the dinner in her new dress and shoes that cost more than her monthly rent, she caught herself checking her reflection obsessively. She wanted to look good for Julian, not just good enough to play her part, but genuinely attractive to him. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. When she emerged from her room, Julian was waiting in the living room, adjusting his cufflinks. He looked up as she approached, and something flickered across his face. Surprise, appreciation, something deeper that made her pulse quicken. "You look—" Julian paused, seeming to search for words. "Stunning." "Thank you," Claire replied, suddenly shy under his intense gaze. "You clean up rather well yourself." Julian's laugh was warm and genuine. "Shall we go charm some German businessmen into giving us their money?" As they rode the elevator down to the waiting car, Claire was acutely aware of Julian beside her, the subtle scent of his cologne, the way his sleeve brushed against her bare arm, the careful way he placed his hand on her lower back to guide her into the vehicle. Each touch was light, appropriate, exactly what one would expect from an attentive fiancé. So why did every contact feel like it was burning through her carefully constructed defenses, leaving her more vulnerable and confused than ever? The evening stretched ahead of them, full of performance and pretense. But as Julian's hand found hers in the darkened car, their fingers intertwining with increasing familiarity, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere between the morning coffee and the concerned shopping trip, the lines between their arrangement and something real had begun to blur beyond recognition. The restaurant was everything Claire had expected, dimly lit, impossibly elegant, with prices that would make her former self faint. She sat beside Julian at a round table, his hand resting possessively on her thigh beneath the crisp white tablecloth, while he conducted business in 3 languages with the ease of someone born to this world. "And this is my fiancée, Claire Morgan," Julian said, introducing her to Klaus Weber, the lead representative from the German construction firm. Klaus was probably in his 50s, distinguished in the way that only European men seem to manage effortlessly. "Enchanting," Klaus said, bringing Claire's hand to his lips in a gesture that was perfectly proper, yet somehow made Julian's fingers tighten on her leg. "Julian, you are a very lucky man." "I'm well aware," Julian replied, his voice carrying a subtle edge that Claire recognized as his boardroom tone, polite but unmistakably territorial. As the evening progressed, Claire found herself surprisingly at ease. The conversation flowed between business and culture, and she discovered that her art history degree actually proved useful when Klaus mentioned his collection of contemporary British paintings. Julian watched her with something that might have been pride as she discussed technique and artistic movements with genuine enthusiasm. "You know, Claire," Klaus said during dessert, leaning closer than strictly necessary, "if you ever tire of the construction business, I have a gallery in Berlin that could use someone with your expertise." Julian's fork clinked against his plate with unusual force. "Claire is quite satisfied with her current position, aren't you, darling?" The endearment rolled off Julian's tongue with surprising naturalness, though Claire caught the warning beneath the sweet words. She was about to respond when Klaus's phone buzzed. "Forgive me, I must take this," Klaus said, rising from the table. "My daughter. She's performing in Vienna tonight." As Klaus stepped away, Julian turned to Claire, his grey eyes darker than usual. "Are you enjoying Klaus's attention?" Claire blinked, surprised by the sharp edge in his voice. "I was being polite. Isn't that what you wanted?" "Polite, yes. Charmed by his obvious interest in you. Less so." The realization hit her like a physical blow. Julian was jealous, actually genuinely jealous. The knowledge sent a thrill through her that she tried desperately to suppress. "It's not like that," she said quietly. "He's just being continental. Besides, this is all pretend, remember? I'm playing a part." Something flickered across Julian's face. Hurt, perhaps, or frustration. Right, of course. Playing a part. Before Claire could decipher his expression, Klaus returned, and the evening continued with Julian noticeably more possessive, his hand never leaving her, his attention never wavering from her face when she spoke. By the time they said goodnight to the German delegation, Claire felt dizzy from the intensity of Julian's focus. The car ride home was quiet, tension crackling between them like electricity before a storm. Julian stared out the window at the London streets, his jaw tight, his hands clenched in his lap. "Julian," Claire began, but he cut her off. "You were perfect tonight," he said, still not looking at her. Klaus was clearly impressed. "The contracts will be signed by Friday." "That's not what I was going to say." Finally, Julian turned to face her, and Claire's breath caught at the raw emotion in his eyes. "Then what? Were you really jealous?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Julian was silent for so long that Claire began to think he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Yes." The simple admission hung between them, loaded with implications that neither seemed ready to address. Claire's heart hammered against her ribs as she processed what he'd revealed. "Julian, we're home," he said abruptly as the car pulled up to their building, effectively ending the conversation. The elevator ride to the penthouse was excruciating in its silence. Claire could feel the tension radiating from Julian, could see the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. When the doors opened, he strode toward his study without a word, leaving Claire standing alone in the foyer, her mind reeling. She had just changed into her pajamas when she heard it, the sound of something crashing, followed by a string of curses that would have made her mother faint. Concerned, Claire padded toward Julian's study, finding the door ajar. Julian stood amid what appeared to be the remains of a crystal paperweight, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his hair disheveled for the first time since she'd known him. He looked up as she appeared in the doorway, and she was shocked to see something almost vulnerable in his expression. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to wake you." "What happened?" Claire stepped carefully around the shattered glass, noting the way Julian's hands were shaking slightly. "I was trying to work, and I couldn't concentrate, and—" He ran a hand through his hair, messing it further. "I keep thinking about the way he looked at you, the way you smiled at him." Claire's heart clenched at the raw honesty in his voice. "Julian, it didn't mean anything." "Didn't it?" Julian's eyes met hers, and she saw a depth of emotion there that took her breath away. "Because for a moment tonight, watching you laugh at his stories, seeing you come alive talking about art, I forgot this was supposed to be pretend." The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Claire took a step closer, drawn by something she didn't fully understand. "Maybe," she said softly. "It doesn't have to be." Julian's eyes darkened, and for a moment Claire thought he might close the distance between them. Instead, he stepped back, his professional mask sliding back into place. "Yes, it does," he said, his voice returning to its usual controlled tone. "That's what we agreed. That's what's safe." "Safe for who?" Claire challenged, surprising herself with her boldness. Julian's laugh was bitter. "For both of us. Trust me, Claire, I'm not the kind of man you want to get involved with. Not really." Before Claire could respond, Julian had brushed past her, leaving her standing alone in his study among the scattered pieces of crystal, wondering if she'd imagined the longing in his voice when he'd said her name. As she cleaned up the glass, a task Julian would undoubtedly protest if he knew, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between them tonight. The careful boundaries of their arrangement were crumbling, and neither of them seemed to know how to stop it. And perhaps, Claire thought, as she swept up the last shards, she didn't want to stop it at all. 3 days passed in careful politeness after the dinner with Klaus Weber. Julian was perfectly cordial, professionally attentive and utterly distant. He left for work before Claire woke, returned after she'd gone to bed, and when they did cross paths, he treated her with the same courteous detachment he might show a respected colleague. It was driving her absolutely mad. Claire found herself lingering in the kitchen each morning, hoping to catch him before he left. She invented reasons to visit his office during the day, only to be told by his secretary that Mr. Blackwood was in meetings. The man who had confessed to jealousy, who had looked at her with such raw honesty, had vanished behind a wall of professional indifference. Friday evening found Claire alone in the penthouse again, staring out at the London skyline, while rain drummed against the windows. She'd ordered Chinese takeout, a small rebellion against the elegant catered meals Julian usually arranged, and was contemplating the wisdom of opening a bottle of his expensive wine when she heard his key in the lock. Julian appeared in the doorway to the living room, and Claire's breath caught. His usually perfect hair was damp from the rain, his tie hung loose around his neck, and there were actual wrinkles in his shirt. He looked tired, disheveled, and absolutely devastating. "You're home early," Claire said, trying to keep her voice casual. "The Weber contracts were signed this afternoon," Julian replied, shrugging out of his suit jacket. "I thought we should celebrate." He held up a bottle of champagne, Dom Perignon naturally, and for the first time in days offered her something that resembled a genuine smile. "With Chinese food?" Claire gestured to the takeout containers scattered across his pristine coffee table. Julian's smile widened. "I can't think of anything I'd rather do." They ate sitting on the floor, Julian's idea, much to Claire's amazement, with the coffee table between them and champagne flutes balanced precariously on the carpet. Julian had loosened his tie completely and rolled up his sleeves, and Claire couldn't help noticing the way the white cotton clung to his forearms. "I owe you an apology," Julian said suddenly, setting down his chopsticks. "I've been avoiding you." Claire nearly choked on her lo mein. "Have you? I hadn't noticed." Julian's look was wry. "You're a terrible liar, Claire. It's one of the things I—" He stopped abruptly, as if catching himself before saying something he might regret. "One of the things you what?" Claire prompted softly. For a moment Julian was quiet, staring into his champagne, as if it might hold answers to questions he didn't know how to ask. When he looked up, his grey eyes were serious. "One of the things I've come to value about you," he said finally. "You're honest, direct. It's refreshing after spending most of my life surrounded by people who tell me what they think I want to hear. Is that why you've been avoiding me? Because I'm honest?" Julian's laugh was humorless. "No, I've been avoiding you because—" He ran a hand through his hair, messing it further. "Because the other night, when I saw Klaus looking at you, I wanted to hit him. Actually wanted to physically remove his hands from you. That's not rational behavior for a fake engagement, Claire." Claire's heart began to race. Maybe it's not so fake anymore. The words hung between them like a challenge. Julian's eyes searched her face, looking for something, reassurance perhaps, or permission to feel what was growing between them. "Claire," he said quietly, "you don't understand. I don't do relationships, not real ones. I work, I conduct business, I fulfill obligations. That's what I know." "Then why did you want me to feel at home here?" Claire asked, scooting closer to him around the coffee table. "Why did you care if Klaus was flirting with me? Why do you make me coffee every morning and remember how I like it?" Julian's breathing had grown shallow, his eyes fixed on her face, with an intensity that made her feel exposed and cherished at the same time. "Because," he said, his voice rough, "despite every intention I had to keep this strictly business, I'm falling in love with you." The confession hit Claire like a physical blow. She stared at Julian, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes, the fear mixed with desperate honesty. "Julian," she breathed. "I know," he said quickly, starting to pull back. "I know this complicates everything. I know you didn't sign up for this. I can maintain the professional boundaries if that's what you need." Claire silenced him by reaching out and cupping his face in her hands. His skin was warm, slightly rough with 5 o'clock shadow, utterly real beneath her palms. "You beautiful, impossible man," she said softly. "I'm falling in love with you too." Julian's eyes closed for a moment, as if absorbing the impact of her words. When he opened them again, the careful control he wore like armor had completely disappeared. "Claire," he whispered, and then his hands were in her hair, drawing her closer. Their first kiss was soft, tentative, as if they were both afraid this moment might shatter if handled too roughly. Julian's lips were warm and surprisingly gentle, moving against hers with a reverence that made her chest ache. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Julian rested his forehead against hers. "This changes everything," he said quietly. "I know," Claire replied, her hands still framing his face. "Are you scared?" Julian's smile was small but genuine. "Terrified. You?" "Absolutely." Claire laughed, the sound shaky but joyful. "What do we do now?" "Now," Julian said, his thumb tracing the line of her cheek. "We figure out how to navigate this together. No more contracts, no more pretending. Just us." As they sat surrounded by empty Chinese food containers and the glittering lights of London beyond the windows, Claire felt something settle into place in her chest. This hadn't been part of the plan. Falling in love with Julian Blackwood had never been a possibility she'd considered. But as Julian pulled her closer, as she felt the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her palm, Claire realized that sometimes the most important things in life were the ones you never saw coming. The rain continued to fall against the windows, but inside the penthouse everything had changed. Their careful arrangement had transformed into something real, something beautiful, and infinitely more complex than either of them had bargained for. And for the first time since accepting Julian's impossible proposal, Claire felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The Blackwood family estate in the Cotswolds was everything Claire had imagined, and nothing she'd prepared herself for. Rolling green hills stretched endlessly under a pale English sky, while the manor house itself seemed to have stepped from the pages of a period drama. All honey-coloured stone, mullioned windows, and centuries of aristocratic tradition. "Breathe," Julian murmured as their car crunched up the gravel drive. His hand found hers, warm and reassuring. "They're going to love you." Claire wasn't so certain. Since their confession 3 weeks ago, she and Julian had existed in a blissful bubble of newfound intimacy. They shared morning coffee and evening conversations, stolen kisses in his office, and long talks that stretched deep into the night. But meeting his parents felt like stepping back into the real world, a world where she was still just Claire Morgan, from a middle-class family, now pretending to belong among Britain's elite. "What if they see right through me?" she asked, smoothing her cream-coloured dress for the 100th time. Julian had insisted on buying it, claiming it made her look luminous. But now she worried it was too simple, too understated. "Then they'll see exactly what I see," Julian replied, lifting their joined hands to press a soft kiss to her knuckles. "Someone extraordinary." The front door opened before they'd even stopped the car, revealing a distinguished older couple who could only be Julian's parents. Raphael Blackwood possessed the same commanding presence as his son, though his dark hair was silver at the temples. Beside him, Sylvia Blackwood was elegantly beautiful in the way that only came with excellent breeding and expensive maintenance. "Julian, darling." Sylvia embraced her son with genuine warmth before turning expectant eyes to Claire. "And you must be Claire. How lovely to finally meet you." Raphael's handshake was firm, assessing, but not unkind. "Welcome to Blackwood Manor, my dear. I hope Julian has been behaving himself." "Most of the time," Claire replied with a smile that earned her a surprised chuckle from Julian's father. Lunch was served in a dining room that could have housed Claire's entire flat, complete with family portraits dating back centuries and silverware that had probably been blessed by Henry VIII himself. Claire found herself seated between Julian and his mother, acutely aware of being studied with the polite intensity of someone evaluating a potential family addition. "So, Claire," Sylvia said, delicately cutting her salmon, "Julian tells us you studied art history. How fascinating. Do you have a particular period of interest?" For the next hour, Claire found herself in surprisingly engaging conversation with both parents. Raphael shared stories of his own university days, while Sylvia revealed an impressive knowledge of contemporary artists. Julian watched the interactions with something that looked like proud amazement, as if he couldn't quite believe how well Claire was fitting into his world. After lunch, Sylvia suggested a walk through the gardens, diplomatically separating Claire from the men. As they strolled among perfectly manicured rose beds, Claire braced herself for the interrogation she was certain was coming. "You're not what I expected," Sylvia said suddenly. Claire's stomach dropped. "Oh? When Julian told us he was engaged, I assumed—" Sylvia paused, choosing her words carefully. "Well, frankly, I assumed it was some society girl he'd chosen for practical reasons. Julian has always been so focused on business, on meeting expectations. I worried he might marry for the wrong reasons." They stopped beside a fountain where stone cherubs played eternally in the spray. Sylvia turned to face Claire directly. Her blue eyes, so much like Julian's, serious but kind. "But the way he looks at you, the way his entire demeanor changes when you're near," Sylvia smiled. "I haven't seen my son this happy since he was a boy. You love him, don't you? Really love him? Not just the idea of him, or what he can provide?" The question cut straight to Claire's heart. "Yes," she said simply. "I love him more than I ever thought possible." Sylvia nodded, seeming satisfied. "Good. Because Julian, for all his success and confidence, has always been afraid of letting people close. His father can be demanding, expecting perfection in all things. Julian learned early to hide his true self, to present only what he thought others wanted to see." She touched Claire's arm gently. "But with you, he's different. Real. Thank you for giving me my son back." Claire felt tears prick her eyes at the unexpected blessing. "Mrs. Blackwood." "Sylvia, please. We're family now." That evening, after an elaborate dinner where Claire successfully navigated 3 different sets of silverware and managed not to embarrass herself with the fish course, she and Julian walked alone through the moonlit gardens. "That went well," Julian said, his arm around her shoulders as they followed a winding path between ancient hedgerows. "Your parents are wonderful," Claire replied. "Your mother said something interesting, though, about you hiding your true self." Julian was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful, almost vulnerable. Growing up here, there were expectations, rules. The Blackwood name meant something, and that something didn't include showing weakness or uncertainty. He paused beside a stone bench, turning to face her. "I spent so long being what everyone needed me to be that I almost forgot who I actually was underneath it all." Claire reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. "And who is that?" Julian's smile was soft in the moonlight. "Someone who burns terrible pasta and gets jealous of German businessmen. Someone who's terrified of disappointing the woman he loves." His hands found her waist, drawing her closer. "Someone who's never been as happy as he is right now in this moment with you." When Julian kissed her this time, it was different from their careful first kiss in the penthouse. This kiss was deeper, more desperate, full of the longing that had been building between them for weeks. Claire could taste the wine from dinner on his lips, could feel the rapid beat of his heart against her chest. "Claire," he whispered against her mouth, and she could hear everything he wasn't saying. His need, his fear, his overwhelming love for her. They broke apart reluctantly, both breathing hard. The night air was cool against Claire's flushed skin, but she felt warm and safe in Julian's arms. "We should go back," Julian said, though he made no move to release her. "Should we?" Claire asked teasingly, enjoying the way his eyes darkened at her tone. "If we don't, I might do something that would scandalize the staff," Julian replied, his voice rough with desire. Claire laughed, the sound carrying across the quiet gardens. "We can't have that. Think of your family's reputation." As they walked back toward the house, hands linked, Claire felt a sense of belonging she'd never experienced before. Julian's parents had welcomed her, not as an obligation or a business arrangement, but as the woman their son loved. The weight of that acceptance, that genuine affection, settled around her like a warm embrace. Inside the manor, portraits of generations of Blackwoods watched from the walls, but for the first time Claire didn't feel intimidated by their aristocratic stares. She belonged here, in this world, in this family, because Julian loved her, and tomorrow they would return to London and continue building whatever this beautiful, complicated thing between them was becoming. The call came on a Tuesday morning, while Claire was reviewing contract proposals in her office. Julian's secretary, Margaret, appeared in the doorway with an expression Claire had never seen before, something between concern and barely concealed panic. "Ms. Morgan," Margaret said quietly, "there's a woman here to see Mr. Blackwood. She says she's his ex-fiancée." Claire's blood turned to ice. "His what?" "Camilla Ashworth. She's quite insistent, and she seems to know things about Mr. Blackwood's schedule, his private matters. I wasn't sure what to do." Through the glass walls of her office, Claire could see into Julian's. He was on a conference call, gesturing animatedly at something on his laptop screen, completely unaware of the complication that had just walked into their carefully constructed world. "Where is she now?" Claire asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Conference room B. I told her Mr. Blackwood was in meetings, but she said she'd wait." Claire's mind raced. An ex-fiancé. Julian had never mentioned an ex-fiancé. In all their late-night conversations, all their intimate revelations, he'd somehow failed to mention that he'd been engaged before. "Thank you, Margaret. I'll handle this." Claire walked to conference room B on unsteady legs, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the glass door she could see a woman who looked like she'd stepped from the pages of Vogue. Tall, willowy, with the kind of effortless blonde elegance that money could buy and breeding could polish to perfection. Camilla Ashworth turned as Claire entered, and her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "You must be the assistant," Camilla said, her voice carrying the crisp tones of expensive education and continental finishing schools. "Claire Morgan, isn't it? I've read all about your engagement to Julian." "And you are?" Claire replied, though she already knew. "Camilla Ashworth, Julian's ex-fiancée, his real ex-fiancée." The emphasis on real was subtle, but unmistakable. Claire felt as if she'd been slapped. "I'm sorry, I don't understand." Camilla's laugh was like crystalline wind chimes, beautiful and cold. "Oh, my dear, did Julian not tell you about me? How careless of him." She settled gracefully into one of the conference room chairs, clearly planning to stay. "We were engaged for 2 years. The wedding was planned, the invitations sent. I suppose he conveniently forgot to mention that when he proposed his little business arrangement to you." The words hit Claire like physical blows. Business arrangement. How did this woman know about that? "I think there's been some misunderstanding," Claire began, but Camilla cut her off. "Has there? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like Julian has found himself a convenient solution to his father's will. A temporary wife who'll disappear quietly when the inheritance is secure." Camilla's eyes were predatory, assessing. "Though I must say, I didn't expect him to choose someone quite so ordinary." Claire's temper flared. "I think you should leave." "Oh, I'm not going anywhere, not until I've spoken to Julian." Camilla examined her perfectly manicured nails. "You see, I've recently returned from Paris and I've had time to think. Julian and we have history, real history, not some fabricated romance for the papers." Before Claire could respond, Julian's voice came from behind her. "Camilla." Claire turned to see Julian standing in the doorway, his face a mask of controlled fury. His grey eyes were arctic, his entire posture radiating the kind of dangerous calm that preceded explosive action. "Julian, darling." Camilla rose gracefully, moving toward him as if the past 2 years had been mere moments. "You look wonderful. Success suits you. What are you doing here?" Julian's voice was deadly quiet. "Can't an old friend stop by to offer congratulations? I read about your engagement in the Times. Quite a surprise." Camilla's smile was poisonous. "Though I suppose congratulations are premature until after the wedding actually takes place." Claire watched this exchange with growing horror. There was history here, complicated and painful, and Julian had never mentioned a word of it. "Claire," Julian said without taking his eyes off Camilla, "could you give us a moment?" The dismissal stung worse than anything Camilla had said. Claire nodded stiffly and left the conference room, but not before she caught Camilla's triumphant smile. Claire made it to the ladies' room before the tears came, She gripped the marble sink, staring at her reflection and trying to make sense of what had just happened. Julian had been engaged before. Seriously enough to plan a wedding, send invitations, and he'd never told her. Had their entire relationship been a lie? Had he simply chosen her because she was convenient, available, naive enough to believe that someone like Julian Blackwood could actually fall in love with someone like her? The bathroom door opened and Lucy rushed in, clearly having heard the gossip that was undoubtedly already spreading through the office. "Claire, I heard. Are you all right?" "No," Claire said simply, her reflection wavering through her tears. "I'm not all right at all." An hour later, Julian found her in his office, staring out at the London skyline. She'd composed herself, at least outwardly, but she couldn't bring herself to look at him when he entered. "Claire," Julian said softly, and she could hear the pain in his voice. "Let me explain." "Were you engaged to her?" Claire asked without turning around. "Yes." The simple confirmation felt like a knife to her chest. "For how long?" 2 years. "And you never thought to mention this? In all our conversations, all our intimacy, it never occurred to you that I might want to know you'd been engaged before?" Julian was quiet for so long that Claire finally turned to face him. He looked haggard, older somehow, as if Camilla's appearance had aged him years in the span of an hour. "I should have told you," he said finally. "I wanted to, but..." "But what? You thought I'd be jealous? You thought I couldn't handle the competition?" Claire's voice was rising despite her efforts to stay calm. "No," Julian said firmly. "I thought you'd see the truth." "Which is?" Julian ran a hand through his hair, destroying his usual perfection. "That I'm exactly the kind of man who would propose a loveless marriage for business reasons. That I'm exactly the kind of man who would use someone like you to solve a legal problem." His grey eyes met hers, and Claire was shocked by the self-loathing she saw there. "That everything Camilla said about me is true." Claire stared at him, her heart breaking for both of them. "Is it? Is this all just business to you?" "No," Julian said, his voice raw. "God, no. Claire, what I feel for you, it's nothing like what I had with Camilla. What we had was expected, appropriate, convenient. What I feel for you is..." "What?" Claire challenged. "What is it, Julian?" "Terrifying," he whispered. "Overwhelming. Real in a way that makes everything else in my life seem like performance." Claire wanted to believe him. Every instinct she had screamed that Julian was telling the truth, that his feelings for her were genuine. But Camilla's words echoed in her mind, poisoning her certainty. "I need time," she said finally. "I need to think." Julian nodded, though she could see the fear in his eyes. "Of course. Whatever you need." As Claire gathered her things and left the office, she couldn't shake the image of Camilla's satisfied smile, or the terrible certainty that the beautiful blonde woman hadn't finished disrupting their lives. Claire spent the night at Lucy's flat, curled on the familiar sofa that had been her refuge so many times before. Lucy had plied her with tea and chocolate biscuits while Claire recounted the day's events. But even her best friend's unwavering support couldn't quiet the storm in her heart. "He loves you," Lucy said firmly, tucking a blanket around Claire's shoulders. "Anyone with eyes can see that. The way he looks at you, Claire, like you're the sun and moon and stars all rolled into one. But what if Camilla's right? What if I'm just convenient? The desperate assistant who was grateful enough to play along." Claire's voice was small, vulnerable in the darkness of Lucy's sitting room. "Then he's the world's greatest actor," Lucy replied, "which we both know he's not. Remember the pasta disaster? The man can't even pretend to cook, let alone fake being in love." Despite everything, Claire found herself smiling at the memory. Julian's face when he'd realized his carbonara was inedible, the way he'd laughed at himself. It had been so genuine, so unguarded. Her phone buzzed constantly throughout the night, text after text from Julian that she couldn't bring herself to read. By morning, there were 17 messages and 4 voicemails waiting. Claire returned to the penthouse the next day to collect some clothes, hoping Julian would be at the office. Instead, she found him in the kitchen, still wearing yesterday's shirt, his hair disheveled and exhaustion carved into every line of his face. "Claire," he said, rising so quickly from the counter stool that he knocked over his coffee cup. "Thank God. I was afraid you'd left for good." "I came for clothes," Claire said quietly, not trusting herself to meet his eyes. "I'm staying at Lucy's for a while." "Please don't do this," Julian's voice was raw with desperation. "Please don't let Camilla destroy what we have." "What do we have, Julian?" Claire finally looked at him, and her heart clenched at the pain she saw there. "Because right now I honestly don't know." Julian moved closer, slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal. "We have this," he said, his hand reaching toward her face before dropping to his side. "This thing between us that's bigger than either of us expected. This love that terrifies me, because I've never felt anything like it. How do I know that's real? How do I know you're not just saying what you think I need to hear?" Julian was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. Then, to her complete shock, he pulled out his phone and began typing rapidly. "What are you doing?" Claire asked. "Calling an emergency board meeting," Julian replied, not looking up from his screen. "I'm going to tell them the truth, all of it. That our engagement started as a business arrangement, that it's become something real, and that I'm withdrawing from the inheritance clause." Claire's eyes widened. "Julian, no, you can't. The company can go to hell," Julian said firmly, setting down his phone and turning to face her fully. "Along with my father's will, my inheritance, and everything else that doesn't matter compared to you believing me when I say I love you. You're talking about millions of pounds. Your life's work. My life's work means nothing without you in it." Julian's voice was quiet, but absolutely certain. "I'd rather share the company with Ethan. I'd rather lose everything than have you think for one more second that my feelings for you aren't real." Claire felt tears streaming down her face before she realized she was crying. "Julian, you can't sacrifice your company for me. Watch me," he said simply. "Unless you give me a reason not to." Before Claire could respond, Julian's phone rang. He glanced at it with a frown, then answered with obvious reluctance. "What is it, Margaret? I said no interruptions." "What?" Julian's face went white. "When? How bad is it?" Claire watched with growing alarm as Julian's expression shifted from annoyed to horrified to furious in the span of seconds. "Don't let anyone else talk to them," Julian said sharply. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. He hung up and turned to Claire with an expression that made her blood run cold. "What's happened?" she asked. "Camilla," Julian said, his voice tight with controlled rage. "She's given an interview to the Daily Mail about our fake engagement and my desperate attempt to manipulate my father's will." Julian's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "She's told them everything, Claire, about the contract, about the financial arrangement, all of it." Claire felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Oh God. The story goes live in an hour. By tonight, every paper in London will be running it. The board will have no choice but to investigate, and when they do, Julian ran a hand through his hair. When they do, they'll discover that technically she's right. The engagement did start as a business arrangement. "But it changed," Claire said desperately. "It became real. How do we prove that?" Julian's voice was hollow. "How do we prove love, Claire? How do we make a boardroom full of lawyers and accountants understand that somewhere between the signed contract and this moment, everything changed?" Claire stared at him, seeing not the confident CEO she'd fallen in love with, but a man whose world was crumbling around him, and it was happening because of her, because he'd chosen to love her instead of protecting himself. "This is my fault," she whispered. "If I hadn't agreed to your proposal, if I had just said no, then I never would have found you," Julian interrupted fiercely. "I never would have discovered what it feels like to love someone more than my own life." He cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite the storm in his eyes. "Don't you understand, Claire? You're not the mistake here. You're the best thing that ever happened to me." Claire's tears fell freely now, her heart breaking for both of them. "What do we do now?" Julian's smile was sad but determined. "Now we face it together. Whatever comes next, we face it together." As they stood in the kitchen of the penthouse that had become their home, Claire realized that Camilla's betrayal had stripped away their last pretenses. There were no more contracts, no more carefully constructed arrangements. There was only Julian and Claire, and the love that had grown between them, despite every odd against it. And somehow, that felt like enough. Outside, London stretched beneath grey skies, and somewhere in the city, printing presses were preparing to destroy their carefully built world. But in Julian's arms, Claire found something that Camilla's malice couldn't touch, the absolute certainty that whatever they faced next, they would face it as partners, as lovers, as two people who had found in each other something worth fighting for, even if it cost them everything else. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 3 o'clock. By noon, every major news outlet in London was running variations of the same story: billionaire CEO's fake engagement exposed. Claire sat in Julian's office, watching him pace back and forth like a caged animal while his phone rang incessantly. "We could leave," Julian said suddenly, stopping mid-stride. "Pack up right now and disappear. I have accounts in Switzerland, property in New Zealand. We could start over somewhere else." Claire looked up from the tablet where she'd been reading increasingly vicious comments about their deception. "Julian, you can't be serious." "Why not? What's keeping us here? A company that's about to fire me? A board of directors who see me as nothing more than a liability?" Julian's voice was bitter. "Maybe Camilla did us a favor. Maybe it's time to walk away from all of this. And prove everyone right." Claire stood, moving to block his restless pacing. "Prove that we really were just playing parts, that our love isn't worth fighting for." Julian's eyes searched her face desperately. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we stay. We face the board, we tell them the truth, and we let the chips fall where they may." Claire reached for his hands, holding them steady between hers. "I'm saying I believe in us, Julian. I believe in what we have, even if no one else does." "Claire, if we do this, if we stay and fight, you'll be dragged through the mud with me. The papers will tear you apart." "Let them," Claire said firmly. "I'm not running away from the best thing that ever happened to me just because some people can't understand how fake can become real." Julian pulled her into his arms then, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "Whatever happens in that boardroom, whatever they decide, I need you to know that." "I know," Claire whispered back. "I love you too." The boardroom at Blackwood Construction felt like a courtroom when they entered at precisely 3 o'clock. 12 stern faces stared at them from around the polished mahogany table, including Julian's cousin Ethan, who wore an expression of barely concealed satisfaction. "Julian," said Sir Robert Henley, the board chairman, "I think you know why we're here." "I do," Julian replied, his voice steady despite the tension Claire could feel radiating from him. "And I want to address the allegations directly." For the next hour, Julian laid out the entire story: his father's will, the inheritance clause, the business arrangement he'd proposed to Claire. The board listened with stony faces, occasionally asking pointed questions that felt more like accusations. "So you admit," said Ethan, leaning forward with predatory interest, "that this engagement was initially fraudulent, designed specifically to circumvent the spirit of our father's will?" "The engagement was initially a business arrangement," Julian corrected, "but it became something real." "Convenient," Ethan smirked. "How very convenient that love happened to blossom just in time to legitimize your deception." Claire felt her temper flare. She'd remained silent throughout Julian's explanation, but Ethan's snide tone was more than she could bear. "If I may," she said, rising from her chair. Julian looked at her in surprise, but she pressed on. "You want to know when this became real? I can tell you exactly." The room fell silent, all eyes on Claire. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice remained steady. "It was the night Julian tried to cook pasta for me," she began. "He was so proud, so determined to make me feel welcome in his home. The pasta was terrible, inedible actually. But he laughed at himself, really laughed, not the polite chuckle he uses in business meetings. And I realized that I was seeing the real Julian Blackwood for the first time." She looked around the table, meeting each skeptical gaze in turn. "It was real when I found him working late, worried sick about a project delay that might cost people their jobs. When he spent his Sunday morning researching art galleries because he remembered I mentioned loving impressionist paintings. When he got jealous of a German businessman who was clearly just being polite." Claire's voice strengthened with conviction. "When he held my hand during a thunderstorm because I mentioned being afraid of lightning." Sir Robert shifted uncomfortably. "Ms. Morgan, while your sentiments are touching, the fact remains that this relationship began under false pretenses." "Did it?" Claire challenged. "Because from where I'm sitting, Julian was completely honest about what he needed and what he could offer. I was the one who chose to accept his proposal, knowing exactly what it was. And we were both surprised when it became something neither of us expected." "You're asking us to believe," Ethan said coldly, "that you fell in love with a man who was paying you to marry him?" "No," Claire replied firmly. I'm telling you that I fell in love with a man who was brave enough to trust me with his vulnerabilities, kind enough to remember how I take my coffee, and strong enough to put my happiness before his own success. She turned to look at Julian, seeing pride and love shining in his eyes. I'm telling you that I fell in love with someone who makes me want to be better than I ever thought I could be. The room was quiet for a long moment. Then Sir Robert cleared his throat. Mr. Blackwood, regardless of the de-evolution of your relationship, the fact remains that you violated the spirit of your father's will through deception. You're right, Julian said, standing to face the board. I did, and if you want my resignation, you have it. But I won't apologize for falling in love with the most extraordinary woman I've ever met, and I won't pretend that what Claire and I have isn't real, just to satisfy your sense of propriety. Before anyone could respond, the boardroom doors burst open. Julian's parents entered, followed by Margaret and what appeared to be a small army of lawyers. Sorry we're late, Raphael Blackwood said calmly, taking a seat at the table as if he belonged there. Traffic was terrible, Sir Robert sputtered. Raphael, this is a closed meeting, is it? Raphael's smile was sharp. Because I seem to recall that as the company's founder and largest shareholder, even posthumously through my wife's holdings, I have a right to attend any meeting concerning my son's position. Sylvia Blackwood moved to stand behind Claire's chair, her hand settling protectively on Claire's shoulder. I also have something to say about my late husband's will. The room held its collective breath. The inheritance clause wasn't designed to force Julian into a loveless marriage, Sylvia continued, her voice clear and strong. It was designed to ensure that he found someone who would love him for who he is, not what he possesses. Someone who would challenge him, support him, and help him become the man we knew he could be. She squeezed Claire's shoulder gently. I'd say that's exactly what's happened here. Raphael nodded. My brother always believed that love was the foundation of true success. Looking at Julian and Claire, seeing how they've supported each other through this ordeal, he fixed Ethan with a steady stare. I think he'd be quite pleased with how things have turned out. The board meeting ended with Julian keeping his position, though not without dissent from Ethan and his allies. As they walked out of the building together, Claire felt lighter than she had in days. That was incredible, Julian said, pulling her close as they waited for their car. What you said in there, I meant every word, Claire replied, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him softly. All of it. As they drove home through the London evening, Claire realized that Camilla's betrayal had accomplished something unexpected. It had forced them to examine their relationship under the harshest possible light and discover that it was strong enough to withstand the scrutiny. They had faced their storm together, and they had emerged not unscathed but unbroken, and that, Claire thought as Julian's hand found hers in the darkness of the car, was worth more than any inheritance could ever be. The weeks following the board meeting settled into an uneasy peace. Julian retained his position as CEO, but the company atmosphere remained tense, with whispered conversations that stopped when he entered rooms and pointed glances that followed him through the halls. Claire tried to maintain her normal routine, but the weight of constant scrutiny made every day feel like a performance. It was on a rainy Thursday evening, 3 weeks after their public vindication, that everything nearly fell apart. Claire had been working late, catching up on correspondence that had piled up during the crisis. The office was nearly empty, just her and the cleaning crew working their way through the building. She was so focused on her computer screen that she almost missed the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Julian appeared in her doorway, but something was wrong. His usually perfect posture was slightly hunched, his face pale, and there was a strange glassiness to his eyes. Julian. Claire rose from her chair, concern flooding through her. Are you all right? I'm fine, he said, but his voice was strained, and she noticed he was gripping the door frame for support. Just tired. Long day. Claire moved toward him, her trained eye taking in details that set off alarm bells in her mind. The slight sheen of perspiration on his forehead, despite the cool office temperature. The way he seemed to be favoring his left side. The barely perceptible tremor in his hands. Julian, you're not fine. You're scaring me. She reached for him just as his knees buckled. Claire. Julian's voice was barely a whisper as he collapsed, his full weight falling against her. The next few minutes passed in a blur of panic and desperate action. Claire somehow managed to catch Julian as he fell, her knees hitting the floor hard as she broke his descent. His skin was clammy and cold, his breathing shallow and rapid. "Help!" Claire screamed toward the hallway, her voice echoing through the empty building. "Someone help me!" One of the security guards appeared, followed quickly by 2 members of the cleaning crew. While someone called for an ambulance, Claire cradled Julian's head in her lap, speaking to him in soothing tones even though he seemed unconscious. "Stay with me," she whispered, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. "Please, Julian, stay with me. Don't you dare leave me now." The ambulance arrived within minutes, but it felt like hours. Claire rode with Julian to the hospital, holding his hand while paramedics worked around them, checking vital signs and asking questions she couldn't answer. At the hospital, Claire found herself relegated to a waiting room chair while doctors disappeared with Julian behind doors she couldn't pass. She called his parents, her hands shaking so badly she could barely dial the numbers. Lucy arrived within the hour, bringing coffee and comfort, but nothing could ease the terror that had settled in Claire's chest. "He's going to be fine," Lucy said for the dozenth time, rubbing Claire's back as she paced the small waiting room. "Julian's strong. Whatever this is, he'll fight through it." But Claire couldn't shake the image of Julian collapsing, couldn't forget how fragile he'd felt in her arms. All their recent troubles, the media attention, the board meeting, the stress of defending their relationship, suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the possibility of losing him entirely. Dr. Patricia Kellerman appeared in the doorway 3 hours later, her expression serious but not grave. Claire shot to her feet. "How is he? Is he all right? Can I see him?" "Mr. Blackwood is stable," Dr. Kellerman said, and Claire felt her knees nearly give out with relief. "He's experienced what we call acute exhaustion, compounded by severe dehydration and dangerously low blood sugar. Has he been eating regularly? Sleeping?" Claire thought back over the past weeks, remembering mornings when Julian had skipped breakfast, evenings when he'd worked through dinner, nights when she'd found him still at his desk well past midnight. "Not really," she admitted. "He's been under enormous stress lately. We both have." Dr. Kellerman nodded, understanding. His body simply shut down. It was his system's way of forcing him to rest. He needs fluids, nutrition, and most importantly, sleep. Real sleep. Not the 2 or 3 hours he's apparently been managing. "Can I see him now?" "Of course. He's been asking for you." Julian looked achingly vulnerable in the hospital bed, dwarfed by the white sheets and connected to an IV that made him seem more fragile than Claire had ever imagined possible. But his eyes were clear when she entered, and he managed a weak smile. "Hello, beautiful," he said, his voice hoarse but unmistakably Julian. Claire burst into tears. She'd held herself together through the collapse, the ambulance ride, the hours of waiting. But seeing Julian conscious and speaking and looking at her with such tender concern for her own distress broke down all her defenses. "I thought I'd lost you," she sobbed, taking his hand in both of hers. "You just collapsed and I didn't know what to do and they wouldn't tell me anything." Hey, Julian murmured, squeezing her fingers weakly. "I'm all right. I'm sorry I scared you." "Don't apologize," Claire said fiercely, wiping her eyes with her free hand. "Just promise me you'll take better care of yourself. Promise me you won't put work ahead of your health ever again." Julian's smile was rueful. "The doctor already lectured me about that. Apparently I'm not as invincible as I thought." "No, you're not," Claire agreed, and then, because her emotions were too raw to filter, "I can't do this without you, Julian. I can't lose you. I love you too much." Something shifted in Julian's expression. The weakness, the vulnerability, seemed to fall away as he focused entirely on her face. "Claire," he said quietly, "marry me." Claire blinked, certain she'd misheard. "What?" "Marry me," Julian repeated, his voice growing stronger. "Not because of contracts or inheritances or business arrangements. Marry me because I love you and I want to spend whatever time I have left on this earth making sure you know how much you mean to me." "Julian, you're on medication. You're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years," Julian interrupted, struggling to sit up straighter in the bed. "Lying here knowing I'd scared you, realizing I might have lost you before I ever told you how completely you've changed my life." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her palm. "Claire Morgan, will you marry me? Really marry me because you love me and I love you and nothing else matters?" Claire stared at him through fresh tears, seeing not the powerful CEO who'd propositioned her months ago, but the man who'd tried to cook her dinner, who defended their love to a room full of skeptics, who'd just nearly worked himself into the hospital because he cared so much about protecting what they'd built together. "Yes," she whispered, and then louder. "Yes, of course, yes." Julian's smile was brilliant despite his exhaustion. "Good, because I already bought a ring, the real one this time. It's in my desk drawer, middle compartment, behind the quarterly reports." Claire laughed through her tears. "You bought a ring? 3 weeks ago, right after the board meeting. I wanted to ask you properly, when all the chaos died down." Julian's thumb traced circles over her knuckles. "I wanted to give you the proposal you deserved, romantic and perfect and entirely about us." "This is perfect," Claire said softly, leaning down to kiss him gently. "This is absolutely perfect." As they sat together in the quiet hospital room, Claire realized that Julian's collapse had been a terrifying reminder of what really mattered. Not the media attention, not the corporate politics, not even the judgment of others. What mattered was this, the two of them choosing each other, committing to weather whatever storms might come. And that was a foundation strong enough to build a lifetime on. The engagement ring was exactly what Claire would have chosen for herself, a classic solitaire with a stone that caught the light and threw rainbows across the walls of Julian's office. Simple, elegant, and utterly perfect. Julian had insisted on sliding it onto her finger the moment he was released from the hospital, despite still being pale and shaky from his ordeal. "It's beautiful," Claire said for the 5th time in as many minutes, admiring the way the diamond looked on her hand. "But Julian, we need to talk about the wedding." They were back in the penthouse, Julian under strict doctor's orders to rest for the remainder of the week. Claire had taken personal leave to monitor his recovery, which mostly involved forcing him to eat regular meals and preventing him from checking his work emails every 5 minutes. "What about the wedding?" Julian asked, looking up from the bowl of soup Claire had insisted he finish. "Well, we've already announced our engagement publicly. People are expecting a ceremony. But do we do it quietly? Big society event? Something in between?" Claire curled up beside him on the sofa, careful not to jostle his still recovering form. "I just want to make sure we're doing this for us, not for appearances." Julian set down his spoon and turned to face her fully. "Claire, I don't care if we get married in Westminster Abbey or the registry office down the street. I don't care if there are 500 guests or just us and a witness. I only care that at the end of it you're my wife." His words sent warmth flooding through Claire's chest. "Your parents might have opinions about that." "My parents," Julian said with a smile, "are currently planning what my mother calls the wedding of the century. She's already called 3 times today about flowers, and my father has opinions about the wine selection. They're having the time of their lives." Claire laughed. "And you're okay with that? Are you?" Julian's expression grew serious. "Because if you want something small and private, I'll tell them to scale back their plans. This is your day as much as mine." Claire considered this. A part of her, the practical, middle-class part that still occasionally felt overwhelmed by Julian's world, wanted something simple. But another part of her, the part that was learning to embrace being loved by Julian Blackwood, wanted to celebrate that love openly and joyfully. "I think," she said slowly, "I'd like something beautiful, something that shows the world we're not ashamed of how we found each other or where we ended up." Julian's smile was soft and proud. "Then beautiful is what you'll have." Over the next 2 weeks, as Julian gradually returned to work and resumed his normal schedule, with Claire's careful monitoring, wedding plans took shape around them. Sylvia Blackwood proved to be a force of nature when it came to event planning, but she consulted Claire on every detail, genuinely interested in her preferences and opinions. "I was thinking late spring," Sylvia said during one of their planning sessions at the penthouse. "May or June. The gardens at the estate will be perfect by then." "The estate?" Claire looked up from the fabric samples they'd been examining. "Well, naturally. It's where Julian was christened, where he took his first steps. It only seems fitting that he should be married there too." Sylvia paused, suddenly looking uncertain. "Unless you'd prefer somewhere else? I don't want to assume—" Claire felt a rush of affection for Julian's mother, who was trying so hard to include her in family traditions. "The estate sounds perfect." And it was perfect. On a gloriously sunny Saturday in May, with the Cotswolds countryside in full bloom, Claire became Mrs. Julian Blackwood in front of 200 guests who had come to celebrate not just their union, but the love story that had captivated London society. Claire wore her grandmother's pearl necklace and a gown that Sylvia had helped her choose, silk and lace that managed to be both classic and modern, elegant without being ostentatious. As she walked down the aisle on her father's arm, she had eyes only for Julian, who waited for her beneath an arch of white roses and English ivy. He looked magnificent in his morning coat, but it was the expression on his face that took Claire's breath away. Wonder, joy, and a love so profound that it made her forget there were other people watching. "You look like a dream," Julian murmured as she reached him, taking her hands in his. "You don't look too bad yourself," Claire replied, earning a chuckle from the guests close enough to hear. The ceremony itself was beautiful but brief. They'd both insisted on traditional vows, wanting to speak the words that countless couples had spoken before them, binding themselves in the most ancient and sacred of promises. "I, Julian, take you, Claire, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Julian said, his voice strong and clear, carrying across the garden. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." When Claire repeated the vows back to him, she felt the weight of their journey, from business arrangement to genuine love, from careful distance to complete trust. Every word felt significant, binding not just legally but emotionally. The reception was held in a marquee on the estate grounds, with dancing that lasted well into the evening. Claire found herself swept from conversation to conversation, accepting congratulations and good wishes from people who had once doubted the sincerity of their relationship. "You've surprised us all, my dear," Sir Robert Henley said during the dinner, raising his glass to her. "I must admit, I was skeptical about this engagement when it was first announced, but seeing you two together—" He smiled genuinely. "Well, it's clear that whatever brought you together, what you have now is very real indeed." Later, as the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Claire and Julian found themselves alone on the terrace, where they'd shared their first real kiss months before. "How do you feel, Mrs. Blackwood?" Julian asked, pulling her close as they swayed to music, drifting from the marquee. "Perfect," Claire replied honestly. "Absolutely perfect." "And you?" "Like the luckiest man alive." Julian spun her gently, laughing as her skirt flared around them. "Though I have to admit I'm looking forward to getting you alone." Claire's cheeks flushed, but she met his gaze boldly. "Are you now?" "I am." Julian's voice dropped to that low, intimate tone that never failed to send shivers through her. "I have plans for my wife." As they danced under the stars, surrounded by the scent of English roses and the soft murmur of celebration, Claire reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought them here. A business proposition had become the greatest love of her life. A convenient arrangement had transformed into a partnership that made them both stronger and better than they'd been alone. "Julian," she said softly. Thank you." "For what?" Claire looked up at him, this man who had offered her a contract and ended up giving her his heart. "For seeing something in me I didn't know was there. For making me believe I deserved this kind of love." Julian stopped dancing, cupping her face in his hands with infinite tenderness. "Claire, my darling girl, you didn't just deserve this love. You created it. You made me capable of it." He kissed her softly, reverently. "You saved me from a life I didn't even realize was empty." As they kissed beneath the English stars, Claire knew that this was only the beginning. They had years ahead of them to build a life together, to face whatever challenges might come, to grow in love and understanding. But this moment, this perfect, shining moment, would always be the real beginning of their story. The honeymoon suite at the estate's guest cottage was a symphony of candlelight and rose petals, courtesy of Sylvia's romantic inclinations. Claire stood by the window, still in her wedding gown, watching the last of the guests' cars disappear down the winding drive. The reality of being married, truly, completely married to Julian, was beginning to settle over her like warm honey. "Nervous?" Julian's voice came from behind her, soft and understanding. Claire turned to find him leaning against the doorframe, his morning coat discarded, his white shirt open at the collar. He looked relaxed, happy, but she could see the question in his grey eyes, the careful attention to her comfort that had become so characteristic of him. "A little," she admitted honestly. "Not about you, about us. Just about this being real." Actually real this time. Julian moved toward her slowly, giving her time to object if she wanted space. When she didn't step away, he reached for her hands, his thumbs tracing gentle circles over her wedding ring. "We don't have to do anything you're not ready for," he said quietly. "We have the rest of our lives, Claire. There's no rush." The tenderness in his voice, the way he put her comfort before his own desire, made Claire's heart swell with love for this man she'd married. She reached up to cup his face, marveling at the way he leaned into her touch like a man finding sanctuary. "I'm ready," she whispered. "I've been ready since that night when you told me you loved me. I just wanted to savor this moment, being your wife really and truly." Julian's eyes darkened with emotion and desire. "My wife," he repeated, as if testing the words. "God, Claire, I love the sound of that." "Show me," she said softly, and Julian's control finally snapped. He kissed her with a reverence that made her knees weak, his hands gentle but sure as they found the tiny buttons running down the back of her gown. Claire's fingers worked at his shirt, both of them moving slowly, memorizing each revealed inch of skin, each soft sigh and whispered endearment. "You're so beautiful," Julian murmured against her throat, his lips trailing fire across her collarbone. "So perfect. I can't believe you're mine." "Yours," Claire agreed breathlessly, her head falling back as Julian's mouth found the sensitive spot behind her ear. "Only yours. Always yours." When her wedding gown finally pooled at her feet, Julian stepped back to look at her, his expression one of such pure adoration that Claire felt tears prick her eyes. "My wife," he said again, reaching for her with shaking hands. "My beautiful, extraordinary wife." Their coming together was tender and passionate, a perfect blend of desire and deep emotional connection. Julian worshipped her with his hands and mouth, whispering words of love against her skin, until Claire was trembling with need. When they finally joined, it was with a completeness that transcended the physical, a melding of hearts and souls that left them both changed. Afterward, they lay entwined in the candle-lit darkness, Claire's head on Julian's chest, his fingers playing through her hair. "I have a confession," Julian said quietly. "Hmm?" Claire traced lazy patterns on his chest, feeling drowsy and utterly content. "I started falling in love with you the day you negotiated coffee into our contract. The way you looked at me like I was slightly mad but were willing to play along anyway. I knew then that you were going to turn my world upside down." Claire lifted her head to look at him. "Just coffee. That's all it took." Julian's smile was soft in the flickering light. "That's all it took to show me that you were going to challenge me, surprise me, make me question everything I thought I knew about myself." His hand cupped her cheek. "Best business decision I ever made, hiring you as my assistant." "Even better decision falling in love with me," Claire teased. "That wasn't a decision," Julian replied seriously. "That was inevitable. You made it impossible for me to be anyone but who I really am. You made me want to be worthy of you." "You already were worthy," Claire said firmly. "You just needed to believe it." As they drifted towards sleep in each other's arms, Claire reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them here. From a desperate business arrangement to a love so profound, it had survived public scrutiny, family pressure, and their own fears. Tomorrow they would begin their married life properly, but tonight was theirs. A perfect celebration of the love they'd fought so hard to protect and nurture. "Claire?" Julian's voice was drowsy. "Thank you for saying yes to all of it. The contract, the real engagement, marrying me." Claire pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. "Thank you for asking. All of it." In the quiet cottage, surrounded by the peaceful English countryside, Mr. and Mrs. Julian Blackwood slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that whatever tomorrow might bring, they would face it together, as partners, as lovers, as two hearts that had found their perfect match in each other. 6 months later, Claire Blackwood stood in the kitchen of their penthouse, watching the London morning unfold beyond the windows while she waited for the coffee to brew. Marriage to Julian had been everything she'd dreamed and more, a daily adventure of discovering new depths to their love, new ways to support and challenge each other. The sound of Julian's footsteps made her turn, and even after all this time, the sight of him still made her heart skip. His hair was disheveled from sleep, his expensive pajamas rumpled, and he looked absolutely perfect. "Good morning, beautiful," he murmured, wrapping his arms around her from behind and nuzzling her neck. "Good morning yourself, handsome." Claire leaned back into his warmth, marveling at how natural this felt, this easy morning intimacy, this comfortable domesticity they'd built together. "How are you feeling today?" Julian asked, his hands settling protectively over her still flat stomach. Claire smiled, placing her hands over his. The pregnancy test had been positive just 3 days ago, and they were still adjusting to the miraculous reality of it. "Perfect," she said honestly. "Tired, but perfect." Julian spun her gently in his arms, his grey eyes bright with wonder and joy. "I still can't quite believe it. We're going to be parents." "Scared?" Claire asked, echoing the question from their engagement. "Terrified," Julian admitted with a laugh, "but also incredible. This baby is going to be so loved, Claire, so wanted." "Good thing we're practiced at figuring things out as we go," Claire said, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him softly. Their morning routine had evolved over the months of marriage. Julian had mastered the coffee machine, with only minor disasters, while Claire had taken over breakfast preparations. They read the papers together, discussed their schedules, and stole kisses between bites of toast. It was ordinary and extraordinary all at once. "I have news," Julian said, as they settled at the counter with their breakfast. "The board voted yesterday on the new charitable foundation." "And?" Julian's smile was brilliant. "Unanimous approval. The Claire Morgan Blackwood Foundation for Educational Arts will officially launch next month." Claire's eyes filled with tears. Julian had surprised her with the proposal a month ago, a foundation focused on bringing arts education to underprivileged children, funded by Blackwood Construction and bearing her name. "Julian, you didn't have to." "Yes, I did," he interrupted gently. "You changed my life, Claire. Now I want us to change other lives together." Besides, his grin turned mischievous, "the board was impressed by your presentation. I think you have a future in philanthropy." Later that morning, as they walked hand in hand to the office, a routine they'd maintained despite raised eyebrows from some quarters, Claire reflected on how their love had grown and deepened. The passionate intensity of their early relationship had mellowed into something richer, more stable, but no less profound. At Blackwood Construction, they'd found their professional rhythm too. Claire had transitioned from Julian's personal assistant to director of community relations, overseeing the company's charitable initiatives. Working together had only strengthened their partnership, each bringing out the best in the other. "Mrs. Blackwood," Margaret called as they entered the building, "there's someone here to see you." Claire looked questioningly at Julian, who shrugged. They walked together to the reception area, where a familiar figure waited. Lucy jumped up from her chair, practically bouncing with excitement. "Surprise! I brought engagement party photos." Over the past months, Lucy had become not just Claire's best friend, but practically a member of the Blackwood family. Julian had secured her a position in the company's marketing department, where her creativity and enthusiasm had quickly made her invaluable. "Lucy, what are you up to?" Claire asked suspiciously. "Nothing, I just thought you might want to see these." Lucy handed over a thick envelope, her grin suggesting she was up to something. Claire opened it to find professional photographs from their wedding, but mixed in were candid shots she'd never seen. Julian watching her with undisguised adoration during the ceremony, both of them laughing during their first dance, quiet moments of intimacy captured when they thought no one was looking. "These are beautiful," Claire breathed, studying a photograph of Julian's face as she'd walked down the aisle. The love in his expression was so pure, so overwhelming, that it made her chest tight with emotion. "That's my favorite too," Julian said softly, looking over her shoulder. "That's the moment I knew nothing would ever be the same again." As they looked through the photographs together, Claire was struck by their journey from that first impossible business proposal to this moment of complete happiness. They'd faced scandal, doubt, near loss, and emerged stronger each time. "Regrets?" Julian asked quietly, as if reading her thoughts. Claire looked at him, her husband, the father of her unborn child, her partner in every sense of the word, and shook her head. "Not a single one. Even the pasta disaster." Julian's laugh was warm and genuine. "Especially the pasta disaster. That's when you knew you were stuck with me." "I was stuck with you from the moment you asked me to marry you," Claire corrected. "I just didn't know it yet." As the London afternoon settled around them, as their colleagues bustled past on their way to meetings and appointments, Claire and Julian stood in the busy lobby of Blackwood Construction, surrounded by the evidence of their impossible love story, and knew that their greatest adventure was just beginning. They had found each other through the most unlikely circumstances, loved each other through the most difficult challenges, and would continue building their life together one day, one kiss, one shared dream at a time. Leave your comment and share this story with someone special. It truly helps us keep bringing new stories to you. And if you want to follow every chapter of this emotional journey, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. Your support makes all the difference.